Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The U.S. Supreme Court on Friday overruled a constitutional right to abortion in America, leaving it to states to decide whether to permit the procedure that has been legal nationwide for 5 decades. Though technically speaking, it does not impose a direct ban on abortion immediately, its legal impact though ripples throughout the country, making it an even more divisive issue for America. While protests against the Supreme Court ruling already flood across America, the international community also spoke out against the hindering of women's rights to abortion in America. People cannot help but ask what it means for the progress women have made in the past decades. Are we seeing a bigger cultural war going on in America as a result of this? I invite 2 legal scholars from the U.S. for this discussion. Join me now. We have Leslie Jacobs, professor and executive director of the Mike George Capital Center for Law and Policy from the University of the Pacific. In Washington, D.C., we also have Bruce Fine, a constitutional lawyer. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. How big a cultural war do you think it is, the dispute about the Roe and Wade this time? Professor Jacobs.
Well, certainly it wasn't a complete surprise what happened with the Supreme Court overruling the Roe versus Wade decision. The significance of that is that the right to choose an abortion is no longer in our Constitution. That means because we have a state system, the states can make the rules that they want to make about abortion. And so will it be a cultural war? We shall see. It's certainly caused a lot of conflict. The states feel differently, as the people in the nation feel differently about abortion and whether it's appropriate.
It seems that the protests are already taking place at the U.S. Capitol and in many other places around the United States. So, Mr. Fine, your take on that?
Yes, I walk in front of the U.S. Supreme Court is where the demonstrations are. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court now is barricaded. It looks like a war zone. There are fences. I live within 2 blocks of the U.S. Supreme Court. I can't walk by like I used to my offices nearby. So that's, I think, symbolic of the divisiveness that's been engendered by the issue. And I think the court was illusory in believing that it had really settled this question in a different way than the prior precedents of Roe and Casey had. Because I do think the next battleground that will return to the Supreme Court is efforts by the so-called pro-life, anti-abortion states to make it a crime for a woman to leave the state and seek and obtain an abortion in a state that permits it. And that, in my judgment, is clearly on the table. There's another issue also. If you read the reasoning of Justice Alito, basically says that if the state has any conceivable rational basis for protecting potential human life, the abortion can be prohibited, even suggesting that if a woman would die by carrying the fetus to term, she has to die.
When I asked about how big a cultural war is it, it seems that things are just beginning to happen, but there were no signs earlier that this might be a big problem, even during a Democrat administration. Professor Jacobs.
Well, there were signs that this could be a problem, given the changes on the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, it has become the thing that they would look at the justices to try to see if indeed they would overrule Roe versus Wade and have that be a reason for putting them on the Supreme Court. So people knew that it might be a problem, but it's with the most recent change to the Supreme Court that the numbers switched. It was at the very last minute when a justice died and another justice came in a month and a half before the election, that really changed the balance on the court. So in the Democratic administration, it was not clear that Roe was in such danger.
Now, how much does it say to many women in the United States that the policy could be just switched overnight with a change of a member of the Supreme Court or two? And what are some of the basic rights that they could hope that they can hold on to if things are changing so dramatically without any ways of turning back?
It's possible that the Supreme Court would overrule other rights, like a right to contraception, like a right to be able to have intimate relations without becoming a criminal, and also the right to gay marriage. But it's not necessarily likely. Abortion has always been a particularly controversial issue. The fact that the fetus is there has just made a big, big difference to the people who are pro-life. So I see the Supreme Court as making a lot of changes in rights and a lot of changes in the law. But in this particular area, as far as women's rights, I don't see that they're going to change other rights soon.
There are very different opinions inside the United States about exactly what this meant. Mr. Fine, particularly, what does it mean for people's belief in Constitution and the interpretation of the Supreme Court of the US Constitution? So your take on that?
Well, I think it shakes public confidence in the independence and impartiality of the court. So it looks like their rulings reflect a government of men, not a government of laws. Now, we go back to one of the earlier questions about were there any foreshadows? You need to remember that Justice Alito himself, among others like Justice Kavanaugh, when they were testifying at their Senate confirmation hearings, styled Roe and Casey as a jumbo precedent, affirmed more than once and in passing 40 times. They didn't explicitly state they would never vote to reverse it, but that was what you would call the subtext of their testimony. And at least you can say there was at least partial deceit in those answers, which was a surprise. That's, I say, the reason why that observation is important is that, in my view, all the future Supreme Court vacancies, when they're filled by nominees before the Senate Judiciary Committee, will be handed a list of cases that the senators do not want overruled. And under oath, they'll tell the candidate, you have to state you will not vote to overrule these cases, otherwise you're not going to be confirmed. Because it's obvious just relying upon hints is not good enough. That, I think, will destroy the independence of the Supreme Court.
For many from outside the United States, there are so much nuance to study about the US in order to know exactly the details about what's going on. What do you think when you say this is only going to be one single case? It's not going to be a domino effect of social changes or, shall I say, legal interpretations of social rights that people have in the US?
I want to be clear that, like Mr. Fine, I am troubled by the court and by the way it's behaving. In our democratic system, legislators and the president are elected by the people and they're accountable to the people, and so they can make policy how they want. But judges are supposed to be doing something different. They're supposed to be interpreting the law written by someone else, and they are supposed to be consistent. And so the most troubling thing about what is going on with these new justices, combined with some old ones, but the conservative majority, is that they do seem to be marching along, changing a number of parts of the Constitution, and inconsistently. That is, with the abortion right, they say, oh, let's send it back to the states to decide because it's such a controversial issue. But then when we get to gun rights, they say, oh, no, let's take it away from the states. Let's tell them that they're not allowed to have gun control. Same thing with religious liberty, right? Let's expand this religious liberty right so that states can't have, for example, anti-discrimination laws. So I am very concerned about the direction of the court. And I do think that it's in one policy direction, which is concerning as well. That is, these judges need to work hard and they need to understand that they need to look like they are independent of politics. And the way that it looks now, it doesn't look that way.
Mr. Fine, there are so many conflicts in US politics. How do you see the latest decision by the Supreme Court likely to be entangled with many other parts of the Washington politics and having an impact on ordinary women and their families?
It always astounded me why a woman would be angry if another woman chose to have an abortion. It doesn't affect their lives. They can go on, they can adopt children and do everything else they want. So I do think that will affect the politics. I do think that Republicans will be in a very difficult and awkward position. It was expressed by Donald Trump himself after the decision, saying, we're going to lose a lot of suburban housewives if we back this decision. So he thought politically, this is going to be a loser. You see, for all these years, Republicans have been able to run on a pro-life platform because it didn't mean anything. Oh, the Supreme Court will decide this, it's their bag. So this is a wedge issue. They keep it so that they can get their money and their donations. Now they're going to have to stand up and actually vote and be accountable. And this is one we don't really know whether they'll flinch or whether they'll go down what I call the fanatic road and tell women, you can't have any abortion ever, even if you have to die. And I do believe that there are many who take that position.
Well, I think I agree that we will see people, see Washington, folks in Washington trying to pass a law to guarantee the right to abortion. I don't think they'll have the votes to do that. And then we'll have to see what happens, indeed, as Mr. Fine points out, when these politicians have to say, yes, I'm in favor of all these strict laws that are now being passed to prevent women from having abortions. This is up to the voters. This is up to the voters in those states to make a decision about whether they want to respect those politicians or they want to use their power to pressure those politicians to pass a law guaranteeing abortion or do other things. So this is in the voters' hands to a great extent. They need to speak up. And I do want to emphasize as well, and this has always been true since Roe versus Wade was decided, which is abortion, the availability of abortion and the ability of women to be able to control their reproductivity is not just a women's issue. Employers, male employers depend upon it. Male head of corporations depend upon it. Spouses of women depend upon it. It's an issue that affects men and women, and we have to see them all having voices both in the political process, but also with these private corporations trying to impact their policy.
This latest development, what do you see it might mean for a further fierce social debate, if not a social rivalry that is taking place in your country?
It will inflame the discourse, if you will. Let me, however, part company with your insinuation that prior to the Supreme Court's decision overruling Roe and Casey, that somehow the country was in turmoil over those precedents. So it's the Supreme Court who has made a non-divisive issue into a divisive issue. It wasn't there before. And now, instead of 200 protesters, I can guarantee you the streets are shut off all around the Supreme Court. It's barricaded like barracks in a military base. And I do think that because the Supreme Court's cavalier treatment of stare decisis, that is respecting precedent, is going to engender a flurry, if not a tsunami, of efforts to get the Supreme Court to overrule countless other cases. Because what the court majority said, Justice Alito, is that if we think a decision wasn't just wrong, but we think it was really badly wrong, it's like the professor lowering a grade from a C- to an F. then it's vulnerable to overruling, as though that's not the height of subjectivity. Grading, and we're really going to find every Supreme Court decision wrong, a little bit wrong, medium wrong, really wrong. And so that means, as a lawyer, I practice for the court, I'll go to my clients and say, everything's on the table now. We'll just point to the Dobbs case and say, yeah, stare decisis out the window, because this case was really wrong. It's not just a little teeny bit. And what standard is really wrong from wrong? There's no standard at all.
It's part of the United States system, or I'd always thought that it is, and I think we all do, that with these judges interpreting the Constitution, they're not supposed to just approach a problem and say, what do I think right now? We have this history and enduring Constitution, and that is what this stare decisis is. It's this rule that it's not just, oh, what do I think? Have the balance this. It's, wow, we are interpreting an enduring Constitution. We're going to stick with this meaning, right? Unless there's something really super wrong with it. And so, as Mr. Fine points out, that is the claim by these justices with this precedent. And it's just an odd claim to make, given that the first decision was 7-2, again, with more than a majority of Republican appointed justices voting in favor. And then it was reaffirmed in 1992 with 3 justices who were put on the court by Republican presidents to overrule Roe versus Wade at really the last minute, stepping back and saying, no, we should adhere to precedent. That's our job as judges, that we are public servants and we do that, as opposed to change the law the way we want to. And so I do agree, particularly with Justice Thomas's concurrence, but really with all of these justices who signed on this opinion, they seem to have a different point of view about when it's appropriate to overrule a prior case, and in this case, swipe away an individual right. When we've seen overrulings before, it has almost always been to expand individual rights. And this is the first one mostly to take it away.